the sort of reaching the next level in our presentations and guided meditations via just zooming out a little bit and talking a little bit about like what are the what are some of the goals of these presentations and these guided practices, like what should we be what should we really reaching to achieve during them? And of course the answer is always using your practice while you're teaching. Always. That's always the answer. Without that, we shouldn't even be talking. Like that's number one. But there are things that tend to make these presentations stick in your for your students. And that's what I wanted to just take a few moments today to talk about. Is just a few ways that I feel that our work as meditation teachers can really stick for our students. Sutras. Sutras are what primarily all of yogic tradition, well, not all of it, okay? Like, they're not all written like that, but a majority of the teachings that we use in this tradition, the Shiva Sutras, the Vijnana Bhairava, a little bit from the Yoga Sutras, yada yada, etc., etc., etc. Sutra, sutra, sutra.
Pratyabhigya Hridayam.
Pratyabhigya Hridayam. All of them are written in a sutra format. The word sutra means thread or string for transcendence. Comes from the Latin suture, and the idea is that it is this thread that sort of strings together a larger concept, one stitch at a time, one little thread that stitches together something much bigger than itself. Why is a sutra so valuable? Because a thread is something you can carry in your hand. It's you can put it in your palm, you can carry it. What it stitches together, you can't carry in your hand usually. It's a much bigger concept. But the thread is that which you can carry. So when we teach, we should always sort of in the back of our mind remember that when this student wants to meditate that night, or they want to meditate 3 days later, or they're in their life surrounded by their karma and they're trying to use what you're giving them, they can't pick up the whole fabric of your presentation. They can just pick up that thread and they can start stitching that work through their life, little by little, breath by breath, piece by piece. So our presentations ideally would have such a gift to give our students. And so I want sort of us to work on and set as personal goals, and like start to bring it in to our very next presentation is the idea of writing a sutra based on your work. It doesn't have to be profound, it doesn't have to be poetic.
It does have to be in Sanskrit, though. No.
Yeah, right. So it just needs to be that thread that someone can keep with them in their life or in their practice to start stitching this concept through their life. So you're going to write your presentation. Okay, usually the last thing you would be able to do is actually write this sutra. Because, it's the synthesis. It's sort of it's what emerges from the whole thing. That somehow ties it together. In common we usually would call this, your takeaway, your thesis statement. And these are the same concept, but I want you to see the parallels with this is also how the yogic tradition has structured itself.
Can I see the next slide? Because I just want to make sure I'm not...
It's about Dharma.
Oh, great. Okay, so you might write your whole presentation and then find this link, what is really glowing through this? Just an example, the first thing that bubbled up for me was when Amisha was talking and she was saying surrender helps your life unfold. Maybe when she writes her presentation, that process of 3 years ago, starting to surrender and allowing her life to finally unfold instead of whatever it was before that, is what's shining through the presentation. Doesn't have to be that, Amisha, but just an example. she might look back at the presentation once there's this sutra idea and see like, oh, that's not really supporting the sutra, right? And it might mean a lot starts to get stripped away. So I just mentioned that because simplicity can really help your presentation land somewhere. You know, when there's so many ideas and it's not all stitched together, it can kind of be like, oh, what was I supposed to be focusing on? What was the takeaway? So as it starts to become more streamlined, you know, and you really have a clearer vision of like, oh, this is the juicy part. This is what I really want to stick. Just give yourself permission to surrender some of the work you've done. It might feel like all of the work you've done at times, and let parts fall away. I do notice that sometimes people like have multiple presentations in one because there's sort of this like holding on to like, but that was a really good idea. Feel free to, you know, keep a file on your computer where you have the parts you've trimmed away so that you have inspiration to write future presentations. But this should help make things simpler and not make them more complicated by having a new step, right?
Yeah. Simpler doesn't mean it's easier. Simpler actually means you're working harder so that it's simpler for your students. And Babaji always says that the teacher is the individual who's working the hardest in the room. If, you know, 10 times, 100 times, he's used different numbers. You know, but he always says they represent the hardest work in the room. So simpler for them, it means work for you, which is, I think we're all familiar with that. So you're not going to necessarily like, I don't know how to put. You need to write one of these for your next presentation, so that it's like a part of your process. We don't. I'm on the fence about should they say this sutra at the beginning to like actually, because that's how the yogic tradition does it. They say the sutra, then there's the commentary.
I think it can be organic, you know, as you go through your process, maybe you want to lead with the sutra, but if that feels like forced and doesn't really make sense, it's not required.
But, you know, I think it's a great goal. I think it'd be a good goal. And what we're going to also do is when people listen to your presentation, we're going to start taking a minute or two at the most afterwards in silence, and people are going to write a sutra based on what they took away from your presentation. Like they're just going to write like what they would think your sutra might be. And for that reason, actually, we might not want to see. Well, anyway, we'll get to all the details, but just write a sutra for your next presentation. You can tell this is a budding concept. I'm really excited about it, but it's still taking shape.
It's still unfolding. I guess we have to surrender more.
Yeah. So, yeah, the idea is there, though.
The nectar starting to drip.
It's just the more that I've been, in general, we've been doing a lot more teaching, meditation, and a lot of programs. Lately, there's been a lot more online programming, a lot more teaching going on. And I keep walking away from a lot of the sessions feeling like this is where I need to work. This is where I think we all need to work, is like, what can you take with you? So, next up, read that.
We muted it.
Sure. Just one moment. Okay. So, any questions about that one before we have one more concept?
Does it make sense? Thumbs up if it seems doable and clear. Okay. Well, great.
I do have a question though. So when we post it, do you want us to post the sutra with it? Because then everyone will see
I
it.
think it's going to be more important to have that. I would love to see them personally.
Yep.
I would really
And
like
maybe
to
the feedback will be more based on
well,
like, was that
maybe
clear
that's
in their presentation? So it
I'd
doesn't
much
have to
rather
be a
see-
secret.
Yeah, I want to see your sutras, and I'm excited actually. I'm excited to see them. And so that's part one of making our presentations really support our students. And phase two is another concept called Dharana. Dharana. So, okay, sure.
So phase one was for the presentation portion.
Oh, yes.
Right, you're sharing a presentation,
That's
what's the takeaway? And now we're shifting
And
to
this
the
is,
second part, which is when you're guiding meditation.
yes, thank you so much. Yeah, so this part is purely about the guided part, practice aspect. And interestingly enough, it's almost like the sutra of your meditation, but it's called a dharana. And Patanjali defines dharana as concentration or the act of fixing the mind on one thing. That's dharana in Sanskrit. And the idea here is that our meditation practices also need to have this focal point, this almost like a hub of a wheel where everything really revolves around this one thing we're really aiming for, or like more like a target that we're aiming our awareness at, like this archer in the image. And so,
Did you draw that?
no, but it is looking like my drawings. And so, in a way, you're gonna design a dharana, and I say design because I feel like dharanas, and I'll talk about a few examples in a moment. Dharanas are artistic. They usually are somewhat of a. They're not necessarily like visualization, but they're an experience we're aiming at. They're a place we're aiming towards. Like, for example, imagine with this upcoming presentation with surrender. You know, where do you want your students to aim their awareness to experience surrender? Just a few moments ago, we took time to literally jot down what might have been cues that would have helped you get to the place you were just at, right? So in a way, like those cues you wrote down a moment ago would directly inform describing this target for a new student.
This is helpful for all forms of meditation that we're studying, but especially surrender is so subtle that we can describe it in so many different ways. You know, words I've used are like a melting, a softening, or sometimes it's like the waiting for the soap bubble to land in the hand without grasping it.
In the Tao Te Ching, they always, and I know we're not like Tao Te Ching practitioners, but I remember they say it's as smooth as melting ice. They always use melting ice because it's like you never really see it melt, but it melts right in front of you.
And there's like almost infinite ways. But it gets confusing if you talked about too many in one meditation.
Just like that last moment when we were using all those different ones.
Yeah, like I wouldn't recommend like using the melted ice and the like catching a bubble in the same meditation.
Exactly, yeah.
So the dharana is almost like, okay, here's how I'm going to guide people to surrender in this meditation, right? A floating, a softening, you know, and then it's almost like all the cues you give help with that experience so that it doesn't get jumbled.
Something that's important is as soon as we open the door of this creative process, we almost have to simultaneously recognize, okay, so this door is opening to this creative process, but we always want that door to be sort of opening in the house of Shambhavananda meditation. We don't want to just open the door to some random house. We're not totally sure where this door leads. We want to open these creative doors, these creative openings, into practices that we can count on. Practices that are very clearly things that we've been given. Hamsa, mantra, the heart, surrender, and, you know, things that we've really clearly been given. People often feel like, that might be limiting, but in a way it's almost like liberating because you're not reinventing the wheel. Oh my God, trust me, you don't want to try and invent the wheel of meditation. I would never embark on that, you know? So you're just trying to flavor the wheel, color the wheel, so that people can actually participate. Dharma.
Yeah, I had maybe just a clarifying question, because I know we brought up earlier, I think Abaya asked if there was any confusion between tension release and surrender. And I find that, like, at least in Sacred Journey, when it talks about heart meditation and then surrender practice, and also I think tension release, it's almost like, for me, my understanding is like they all kind of start the same, but they kind of end a little different. And I just have a question about those three. Like, and to me, like they're all kind of Rudy practices too. So, um, is is and I think with the heart meditation and surrender, like there's that aspect of expansion in my understanding of both of them. And it might be slightly off topic, and but I'm just wondering if either of you could speak to that.
My initial reaction, Dharma, is that it's sort of like a Venn diagram where I feel like I can be working at the heart and I can be surrendering sometimes. They overlap, but I can also work and surrender in a way where maybe kind of like Madhurani was sharing the like dharana with the walls of skin, allowing her to find like more space. And then it's not necessarily so localized, in my heart. So I think they overlap sometimes, but they can also be distinct. Another example of that, we teach our level 1 yoga teacher trainees the heart, and they're like drawing the mantra towards the heart. So they're starting to bring focus to this energetic center, but we definitely haven't talked about surrender yet. So it's like they can start to be like enlivening the center and building more awareness and saying the mantra from here. So it's like you can do a heart practice without necessarily having to know about surrender, and you can do a surrender practice without focusing on the heart. But I think I am sort of avoiding your question in a way, because it's almost like okay, so as experienced practitioners, when we actually get into it, like what's the difference? Follow
Yeah.
up?
Well, it was sort of that, like when you were talking about the difference, for instance, with tension release and then surrender, and you were talking about we actually do the digesting in a way through the surrender. Like that was my understanding of surrender. It's like there's actually something that you are surrendering. Whereas the heart meditation practice was a little bit more just focusing on the expansion. So I guess I just wanted to make sure that, like, if I make that distinction, like, does that align with the teaching?
Yeah, it does feel like the heart practice is a more emphasis on the inhale and the expansion, and then the surrender practice has a little bit more emphasis on the exhale and the releasing. And then they probably, are essentially the same practice. I don't really see them being that different at all. Um, the only difference I might see is in the reason that I find myself teaching new people talking more about the heart is because that expansion and that inhale breath is just, it's a little more tactile, and I feel like easier for people to relate to, whereas the exhale and the idea of like letting something go is a little bit more vague. And to be perfectly honest, the exhale itself, people often lose their focus for a variety of reasons. The breath is going out, the breath is the same temperature as your body, you don't feel it as much on the exhale, the muscles gently contract, there's less sensation in the physical body. The experience of letting something go is not as dramatic as opening something up. So in a way, it's like the same practice, but it's almost like by the time you get to it in the form of surrender, you're able to really bring that same practice into more. You're able to flesh out more of its capacity. Whereas with the heart, it feels like it's sort of, But if you ever find a Rudio and he's teaching a heart meditation, you better believe it's got everything in it, and you need to go to the top. But overall, as a concept, that's how I see them sort of layering together. And I think the further down the road we get with our practices, the more, yeah, we start to relate to this inner sensation that is, it starts to become quite arbitrary. What, which is funny because when Baba Ji heard there was a meditation teacher training level 3 being offered, he sort of laughed and he was like, why don't we just call it 100 ways to surrender? As if like they're all sort of the same thing anyway. So I mean, to someone like him, it's almost arbitrary that we have, oh, this level 2 meditation. Oh no, this is level 3. So yeah, I think when Abaya said it's sort of the further down we go, the more similarities we see. I think comes up a lot.
Good question.
Yeah.
I feel like it's raised more questions inside of me, so I hope you feel clearer. Amisha? Oh, Dharma.
No. I'm happy to live in the question for a while too.
Yeah, it kind of brings it up for me as well, because when I think about surrender in Shambhavananda Yoga and how we practice meditation, every meditation is surrender. We talk about surrendering our thoughts. We talk about, it's all surrender. So I guess I was just thinking of this meditation teaching as actually using words and focusing on the surrender piece of it, because I think in all of these practices, there's a surrender component. So I think it's more verbally focusing on the surrender. Is that kind of the way to look at this? Because I can see in every practice that Dharma mentioned surrender. For me, even the tension release, when I'm taking that inhale in, I am kind of expanding and getting in the crevices, and then I'm releasing. So in a sense, I guess I've looked at all of the meditation practices as a form of surrender, which makes it.
In fact, I had a lot of resistance to this topic in general leading up to the training, because I was like, I remember telling about it, I was like, surrender, how are you going to isolate that? And how is it its own thing all of a sudden? I thought it was like the umbrella over which everything was contained, which really pushed me to read and to be like, when is Babaji talking about it specifically? How is Rudy talking about it specifically? How is it described in Sacred Journey? What does make it unique? And then ultimately that's pushed me to get those 3 guided practices online to say, here's one way to work with surrender with the breath. Here's another way to work with surrender with the mantra, and here's one with the heart, just to say like each, you can go any direction with it, but there's some, you can, like you said, cue it. It does need to be cued in a way where it feels like it relates to your topic. Now we're just going to do mantra and surrender is in there, So yeah, hopefully for me, I almost feel like I try to answer that question with those 3 guided practices, like as almost in action. So the dharana is sort of that concept right there. It would be like stepping back and saying, okay, if we're going to be working with mantra and surrender, if I wanted to describe the bullseye of this experience, how would I say it? We sort of wait until that last minute to like say it, like as if it'll just come through in meditation, and sure, often it does. But there's really no reason not to reach for that, even in your preparation and in your own work. Because the more you sort of feel and then try to actually put it into words, it's almost like the target starts like this big, and then you start to narrow it, and it starts to actually become an actual like place they can focus. So when you're preparing for this next presentation, give it a shot and see if you can put it into words, an actual cue that you would use in your meditation practice a couple of times. You don't have to feel glued to it. You know, it's not like you have to be like, and now feel the walls of skin. Emptiness. Emptiness. You know, you don't have to like stick to your script, but I guarantee you got that script there, you're gonna use it and it's gonna make whatever you say so much clearer. So give it a shot. I'd like to see everybody write this as part of their presentation. I noticed last time everybody was writing out like steps for their meditation practice. If you want to do that, that's fine. Really, for your guided practice, all I'm looking to see is this at this point. I'm assuming that you'll guide us through the technique. That'll take a lot of words. We're about to talk about that. But that this is the one thing you probably want to sculpt beforehand. Anything to add before we wrap? Okay. Any other questions? I got a little bit more to this presentation and then we'll conclude. Okay, so we talked about your presentation as a sutra, your meditation has a dharana. They're both these condensed bullseyes, if you will, of those two moments. And now I just want to spend a little bit of time talking about the actual process of guiding meditation. I hesitated to do this in this training because it's such a cute dog face. So cute, though. If you're not in gallery mode, you can see Alice's dog. I hesitated to do this because I was like, oh no, these guys are all meditation teachers. But then it came up a couple times and it was sort of requested to say, like, that 5 minutes of guidance, do you have any tips overall? And yes, we do. And even just reaching into this to answer that question actually developed it beyond our level 1 understanding. So those of you who are with us in level 1, I think this will be something for you as well. This is not the same exact thing at all. So here's the two basic concepts. Teach the technique and then back up and let them practice. There's my sutra of that concept. Teach the technique and then back up and let them practice. And I stuck with that archery metaphor because I think it's really fitting. In this image, you see, this is actually a picture of Vishwamitra, who is Ram and Lakshman's archery teacher from the Ramayana. So they were both archers. You see them as they're traveling through the woods. Ram and Lakshman, they always have their bow with them. And so this is them as, you know, the depiction of them as kids learning how to shoot. And you can see that Vishwamitra in this image is right up close. You know, he's basically got that bow almost in his hand with him. He's right behind whichever one that is, Ram or Lakshman, you know, looking right down the arrow with them, describing this moment, talking about the release of the arrow. But, you know, and that's how we need to start. How do I hold this bow of the body and the breath? You know, getting them, finding the seat, establishing the breath flow, whatever it might be for you. And then where do I aim this arrow of my awareness? Like, it's true, you got to sort of like almost like move their head and move their bow, and like that's where you're aiming. Point that thing at it. And so in this introductory moment, it's a little wordy. Yeah, just like he's a little close, a little personal there with the kid, you know? That's how we get them started. But then if we want this person to actually start practicing, you gotta back up. You can't seriously have them firing an arrow with you right there or drawing another one into their bow. It'd be super awkward. And often this is what happens is we talk and we talk and we talk, and they're trying to fire this bow, but they're trying to listen to you, and it's like they can't ever just do a few shots. And it took me forever to find a target where it wasn't hitting the bullseye. For some reason, every target that's drawn online is like always the bullseye. Always the bullseye. And I was like, I didn't want it to hit the bullseye because I was like, that's totally what we should expect. No one's hitting the bullseye here. But if you don't give them those 4 or 5 shots to not hit the bullseye, they're never getting any closer, you know? So it's good that they're not, it's fine. But, you know, so you back up and you let them practice. And this is where I say, if you want to to have a little inspiration for your next cue. And if you want to sort of know how many breaths they've really taken, do the practice yourself. Don't just sit there and think. Don't have to look at your notes. Actually do what you just cued. And you'll know what they need next. How often, I don't know if you all teach yoga, but every yoga teacher in the world knows, they've said, do this 3 more times, and then you just go on with the next cue, and they never have done it 3 more times. No, never in history. So it's like, if you're really wanting to do it 3 more times, well, I would recommend never saying do this 3 more times in meditation, because it just sets you up for failure. But if you really want to do it, you do it 3 more times, and you'll see it's like 10 times longer than you thought, maybe 50 times longer. So that's my 2 cents about that moment. And so really, I feel like this encapsulates. I wanted it to be a sutra. I wanted you to be able to, this one sentence, teach it, back up, let them practice. But I did find that this represents the first half, or the first third, and that this same concept changes just a little bit as we proceed. This is the last slide. It changes a little bit once you're in the practice. You need to keep instructing, but it's from a distance. And this is a metaphor, of course, because you're literally the same distance from them. But it's an internal metaphor of like, you're not all up in their business. Like, you don't know if they're taking an inhale or an exhale. You don't know, how it's going for them. So it's just a lighter touch. It's like, it's just assuming that they heard you. It's assuming they already know what you're talking about, but you're just giving that dharana again. Maybe it's a little different emphasis somewhere in there. It's a lighter touch. Just like Vishwamitra backs up from Ram there, taking the shots. He's further back now. He's just sort of guiding it, So it's not all or nothing. It's not like I'm either shooting the arrow with them or I'm just silent and doing my own practice for 20 minutes. It's a gray area. And then I look at that as that's repeatable. Maybe that repetition, maybe you have 2 or 3 times in the course of your, who knows? But you just got to imagine they're out there shooting. You got to give them the time to shoot. And then just imagine like you're just, all right, don't forget, bring that arrow back by the ear, take the breath, see the target, and then let it go. Something like that would instruct an archer. And then they got to try it.